Hello and welcome to Nara. My name is Richard Farmer and I'm an insider with Inside Japan Tours, which means that I lead our group tours and also I do guiding in Kyoto as well. Until very recently I was living in Kyoto. Perhaps you joined me there a month or so ago for our virtual tour there. But just a couple of weeks ago I switched allegiances and I've moved to Osaka, which is also close by. So from Kyoto here to Nara, it takes about 40-45 minutes by train, and actually from Osaka a little bit closer, about half an hour by train. Thank you very much for joining me here today, and actually behind the camera we're joined by another of our insiders, Van Milton. Perhaps if I just grab the camera, I'll let him introduce himself as well.
Hello, nice to see everyone. So I am also, like Richard, an insider, still loyal to Kyoto, but looking forward to welcoming people back. Today I'll be behind the camera and silent, but I'll be here with you in spirit.
So thank you very much, Van. As they say in Japanese, yoroshiku onegai shimasu, which means I beg for your hard work and good favour. So at the moment I'm not wearing a mask. You'll see as we walk around that most people in Japan are wearing masks. When I'm behind the camera I'll be putting it on. But when I hop in front of the camera, I'll take it off briefly, as long as we're in a place where we can social distance with no problems. So I'll hop behind the camera in a second, but before I do so I just want to show you this pillar, which marks the entrance to Tordaiji Temple, which will be the first stop on our walking tour today. So we're basically going to be walking through the area called Nara Koen, which means Nara Park. And one thing we'll be seeing a lot of on our walk today is deer. There's already some here, and this couple are about to feed them these crackers. These are called Shikasenbe, which means deer crackers. They're specially made to be able to be digested by the deer with a kind of flour and a rice bran. It's perfectly safe for them to eat, but you'll see that they really go for it. If you've got some of those in your hands, they will be chasing you to try and get these crackers. The crackers cost about 200 yen and you can feed them if you like, but of course they don't need them. There's plenty of natural food around that they can eat as well. They eat a lot of grass, but the crackers are safe for them to eat. Although a year or so ago they did an autopsy on a deer that had died and they found inside its stomach a lot of plastic bags that they'd eaten. If anything's on the ground, they'll just eat it. So if you do come to Nara, and I hope you do, just be careful not to accidentally drop anything on the ground, because it's really not good for the deer. They'll literally eat anything. So yes, this is where we're starting our walk today. And this pillar says Keigonshu Daihonzan Tordaiji. And Tordaiji is the name of the big temple that we'll see in just a few moments. Tordaiji means Great East Temple. And then the middle three characters, Daihonzan, means Great Origin Mountain. It means it's the head temple of a certain sect, and that sect is written on the top three characters, Keigonshu, Keigon School of Buddhism, which is one of the oldest types of Buddhism in Japan. And maybe if I get a chance later, I'll talk a little bit more about Keigon School of Buddhism and what that is. But yes, let's start walking. I'll hop behind the camera now for the moment and put my mask on. And so we're in Nara, a small city and the prefectural capital of Nara Prefecture. As I mentioned, quite close to Kyoto and Osaka, so it's actually doable as a day trip from both places. You can come in the morning, spend the day in Nara and then go home, and that's ample time to see all of the main sites in this Nara Koen area. Although there's one area, a temple called Kofukuji, which is on the other side of Nara Koen. It's a little bit far for us to include today, but we'll be starting here at Tordaiji Temple, walking up to the Nigatsu door, past Wakaku-Sayamayaki, and then we'll be finishing at the very famous Kasuga Shrine. It's a beautiful day, so I hope you enjoy this walk with us here today. And then this huge structure here is called the Nandaimon, which means the Great South Gate, and it's the main gate leading into Tordaiji Temple. And unfortunately, the gate itself and the temple itself are not the original buildings. If you caught my Kyoto virtual tour a few weeks ago, I mentioned that so many of the wooden buildings in Japan have burnt down, sometimes multiple times over the centuries, and the buildings here are no exception. And yet these ones are still very old. The main gate dates from the 12th century, this structure here, and the current building of Tordaiji dates from the 17th century, so still pretty good going, considering that these structures are made of wood. This gate, actually, the last time it was destroyed wasn't actually fire, which is the most common reason for their unfortunate disappearance, but the last one was destroyed in a typhoon, a tropical hurricane. And then one thing that you can notice here on the side of the gates is these big white lanterns, and you can see the chrysanthemum crest, the Kiku no Mon. And this is the insignia, the crest of the imperial family in Japan. And what this means is that this temple was originally built as an official sanctioned temple by Japan's imperial family. And perhaps the most famous thing that you can see inside this gate are these fantastic wooden sculpted statues of Nio, guardian kings. And you often find these inside the main gates of temples, one with the mouth open, one with the mouth closed, in these fearsome faces with this fearsome posture, guarding the temple. And these are really huge. They're 8.5 meters tall, and they're particularly famous because they were sculpted by giants of Kamakura period, 12th century Buddhist sculpture, two men called Unkei and Kaikei. And you cannot talk about Kamakura period sculpture without mentioning these two names, and particularly Unkei. And they had a team of sculptors working with them, and supposedly they managed to construct both of these statues in just 69 days. And one feature of Kamakura period sculpture is what's called Kamakura Realism. So you get this the motion that you can see at the bottom, the flowing of the robes as if he's standing in the wind, and the really realistic expression. Kamakura Realism, it's not quite the same as naturalism. So if you look at his abdominal area, no matter how many sit-ups and push-ups you do, you'll never manage to create a sculpture your abdomen to create a six-pack like that. So it's not naturalistic, but the expressions and the way that the muscles pop out of the arms is considered very realistic. And this is in contrast to the earlier Buddhist sculpture that you see in Japan from the Heian period, which is still wonderful, but a very different style. The faces tend to be a lot plumper, less realistic, and you get these kind of lines on the neck of Buddhas representing folds of skin. It's not quite realistic, they're still beautiful, but a very different style. So this was a defining feature of Buddhist sculpture from the 12th century onwards. And then if I just hop in front of the camera again, take off my mask, I just want to show you a picture here. Hopefully you can see this okay. So I mentioned these two giants, Unkei and Kaikei, these two giants of Kamakura period sculpture. But this tradition is still being continued now. About 7 years ago, I was lucky enough to meet this gentleman here. His name is Matsumoto Ryokei. So his name also contains that word kei. So Unkei, Kaikei, Myokei. So he belongs to the same school of Buddhist sculptures that goes all the way back to the 13th century, still continuing this tradition. So it's not a hereditary title, it's a title passed on from master to apprentice. So he also has a workshop with around 20 students, and one of those lucky students at some point will be given the name Kei, something Kei, and will then carry on this lineage. And I was lucky enough to meet him, his workshop, this impressive statue that he was working on at the time, with some members of our operations office in Nagoya. I was very privileged to meet him. Okay, let's continue on. Quite a big step here. You need to watch your step as you go over, and then these pillars are worth looking at. Perhaps you can make out the fact that they are not dug into the ground. These pillars are just resting on those base stones. And this is very good for earthquakes. it makes the structure far less rigid. So if there's an earthquake, the gate can just wobble a little bit. This is why it's managed to last already around 400 years. And now ahead of you, or ahead of us, you can see the roof line of Tordaiji, the main event at this temple. The huge, what's called the Daibutsu Den, which means the Great Buddha Hall. And unfortunately, we're not allowed to go inside. We can't live stream from actually inside temples and shrines. But you can see from outside how grand the building this is. And this temple was built in the 8th century. And I mentioned the chrysanthemum crests, which show that it was ordered to be built by the imperial family. And it was ordered to be built by the emperor at the time, called Emperor Shomu. And the building of this temple was around 200 years after Buddhism was first introduced to Japan. But this period in the 8th century was when Buddhism really started to take hold and become a real force within Japan. And Emperor Shomu ordered that this temple be built, and also 60 other temples and 60 other nunneries to be built in every single province of Japan, with this temple here in Nara, which was the capital at the time, as the headquarters of this system called Kokubunji. So when you go around Japan today, it's not uncommon to come across maybe a train station or even an area of a town called Kokubunji. And then within that area, you'll find a temple called Kokubunji, which means country portion temple. And that means that that's either one of the temples, or if it's called Kokubun Niji, one of the nunneries, that was founded all the way back in the 8th century as part of this nationwide system of temples in every province, reporting to this temple in the capital as headquarters. And these were built for the protection of the nation. The idea was that if you have a temple and a nunnery in every single province, that protects the whole country, like a force field around the whole country for protection. But this project nearly bankrupted the country. So inside the temple is the huge Daibutsu, the Great Buddha, this huge 16 meters high, 500 tons bronze Buddha. And they used almost every single last ounce of bronze that they could find in the country at the time. And so this project nearly bankrupted the country. And people all over Japan were asked to contribute funds to assist in the creation of this temple. Nearly 2.6 million people contributed funds, and that was a significant proportion of Japan's population at the time. And around 350,000 people were directly involved in the construction of the temple. So it was really a huge project. And there was a lot of fanfare involved as well. So the temple was officially opened in 752, which is when they held what's called the eye-opening ceremony, where the eyes of the great Buddha were painted in. And that was done by a monk called Bodhisena. And he'd come all the way from India and was in Japan and performed that ceremony. So to have someone to come from, at that time, India was such a place that was far away, exotic. So to have a monk from India performing the eye-opening ceremony created a great deal of fanfare. And as I mentioned, we can't go inside, but I'll just take off my mask and show you. This is a picture of the Daibutsu. Hopefully you can make it out. So this huge bronze Buddha statue inside. And then here there are some people involved in a service, and you can just see for scale how big the statue is compared to them. And they've actually done an X-ray, or multiple X-rays I should say, of this statue, and they found that inside one of his knees there is a tooth. And it's hard to say for sure, of course, but they suspect that is one of the teeth of Emperor Shomu, who commissioned this to be built. And then just here, and there's also one on the other side, but we'll focus on this one. This is Bishamonten, and he's one of the Shitenno. And Shitenno means 4 guardian kings, 4 warrior-like Buddhist deities that protect each of the cardinal directions. And Bishamonten here, he's the guardian of the north. And he's one of the easiest to recognize of the 4 because he always holds a pagoda in one hand, and then in his other hand he holds a kind of trident. And so he's the guardian of the north. And then there are 3 others, one behind us, just here, and then there will be 2 more which we can't see on the inside, on the other side of the gate. And I'm on the wrong side of the camera. I'm just going to go like this. There we go. I'll pop my mask back on. And just here, there's a lovely small little lake or pond. And this pond is called Kagami Ike. Kagami means mirror, so it's the mirror pond. And perhaps you can see that in the center of the pond there's a small little island, and maybe you can just make out through the trees that there's a kind of yellow-orange fence around a small structure in the center of that island. When you see this kind of setup, pond, little island in the middle, and little shrine on the island, you can be almost 100% certain that it's a shrine dedicated to a deity called Benzaiten. And Benzaiten is the Japanese version of the Indian Hindu goddess Saraswati. And she's a god of everything that flows. So of course that includes water, but includes a more metaphorical aspect as well. Things that flow are things like music and knowledge and learning. So people make prayers to her related especially to academic pursuits or pursuits in the entertainment industry. And because of that, she's almost always shown holding a lute. But just to prove that there's always an exception to the rule, hopefully you can see this. This is a picture of Benzaiten not holding a lute. This is a manifestation of Benzaiten called Uga Benzaiten. And in this manifestation, she has a Shinto Shrine gate on the top of her head. And within that shrine gate, there's a coiled white snake with a old man's head. And he's called Ugajin, and they become a kind of combination deity. Maybe we're getting a little bit deep, but if you see this or a female deity holding a lute, then you can be sure that you're seeing Benzaiten or Uga Benzaiten. And just up here, we're going to see a couple of monuments, more recent monuments inside this Tordaiji Temple complex. And one of them is a reproduction of what are called Ashokan Pillars. And these are pillars that can be found in India, which were installed, constructed just after the Buddha's time, so around 2,500 years ago, by a very famous king in India called King Ashoka. And when he was younger, when he first became king, he was quite ruthless. He waged all kinds of wars, wasn't a particularly friendly guy, but later in his life he discovered the teachings of the Buddha and totally changed his ways and became the archetype of the benevolent king, the perfect ruler, just, benevolent, a really wonderful person to have as king. And he then wanted to spread the Buddha's teachings. So all over India he had constructed these pillars, and on the top of these pillars you had designs like this, these lions on the top, and then inscriptions on the pillars telling people the Buddhist teachings. This one here is much newer. It was installed in 1998 to celebrate at that time that 1,700 priests from all of the various sects of Buddhism in Japan collaborated to hold a big ceremony. And then this object here is from 1970. In 1970 there was a big event in Japan, the Osaka Expo 1970, a kind of world fair. And as part of that event they reconstructed a 7-story pagoda that used to be here in this park, and that gold structure was the finial on the top of that pagoda. And after the expo was completed, they deconstructed that pagoda, but they kept the finial and moved it here to Osaka Koen. And there will actually be another World Expo in Osaka, the second time they've hosted it, in 2025, so coming up in just a few years from now, Osaka Expo 2025. And here is a Shinto Shrine gate, which shows us that we will be coming to a Shinto Shrine later on in our walk. The slogan for that 2025 Expo in Osaka is "Designing Future Society for Our Lives," which is a good enough general coverall term that they can basically display almost anything. But I'm sure it will be a wonderful spectacle. Coming to Osaka in 2025 is highly recommended. It's going to be a 6-month event during the year 2025. One other thing that's going to be completed in 2025 is just up here on the right hand side. At the moment, perhaps it doesn't look particularly beautiful. There's some ugly green fences, but that's because they're currently working on this area. And this is an area that used to be where one of those 7-story pagodas, which I mentioned, used to be. So there used to be 2 huge 7-story pagodas, one on the east and one on the west side of Tordaiji. Unfortunately, due to various natural disasters, they were lost. But over the last few years, they've been doing archaeological excavation work here on the right hand side, and they've found lots of interesting things. And you can even see the raised area, that square mound there where the pagoda used to be. And now that they've finished the excavation, they're planning to reconstruct that 7-story pagoda, and they're expecting to complete that. If I just take off my mask and if I just hop down here, so you can see here, this is what it looked like while they were still excavating the area. They've replaced the grass now and it looks much more neat, but they found lots of interesting stuff. We're standing here where this red dot is, and this is where the pagoda was. There's the Daibutsu Den where we just were, and the Mirror Lake. And so over the next 5 years, they're going to recreate this very impressive 7-story pagoda. And if you were able to catch my Kyoto virtual tour a month or so ago, you will have seen a very famous 5-story pagoda in Kyoto, in the Higashiyama area. So this one will have 7. Nara doesn't want to be outdone by Kyoto. In a moment, we're going to see an object that's been designated as a national treasure, actually 2, an object and a building. And this word, national treasure, gets bandied around quite a lot in Japan without much explanation of what it means. So a national treasure is a designation by the Japanese government that signals that an object, it can be an object such as a painting or an old document, a statue, or it can be a building. So for example, the very famous Himeji Castle is a national treasure, as is Tordaiji Temple, the huge temple that we just saw. They're national treasures. And it designates it as an object of special importance, historical and cultural importance. And in Japan, there's only about 1,000 national treasures, which sounds like a lot. But in a country as big as Japan, and with such a long history and so many wonderfully preserved objects, actually 1,000 is not so many. So that designation still retains a special meaning. And then below that, there is another level of designation called Juyo Bunkazai, which means important cultural property. And there's quite a lot more of those, numbering in the thousands. But this is like a designation that's not quite as special as a national treasure, but it's still very much worthy of public interest. And so these are 2 designations that you see quite a lot, but national treasure kind of trumps important cultural property. And one other more recent designation as what's called living national treasure. And so this can actually be a person who is currently alive. So it will often be someone that embodies a certain precious tradition. So for example, someone that is a lacquerware master who has been doing this type of work and has perfected the technique and preserves that technique for generations to come. They may be designated as a living national treasure. Talking of national treasures, here we are. So this bell is a national treasure, and also the building, the belfry, that houses the bell is also a national treasure. And this is the main bell of Tordaiji Temple. The bell itself dates right from the founding of the temple, so from 752. But the belfry, unfortunately, was lost once, but currently dates from the 13th century. Pretty good going. And the bell is huge. It weighs 3 tons. And if you look carefully at the top, you can see those kind of dimples. And if you had time, you could count them, but I can save you the time. There will be 108 of those dimples. And the reason for that is that we have 108 defilements as humans. And so that bell is rung 108 times on New Year's Eve to purify those defilements. But also bells are rung each day. But 108 times is a lot of times to have to ring a bell every day. So they abbreviate it by cutting out the 0 and ringing 18 times each day. And then this building here, I mentioned those different designations. We just looked at national treasures. This one, not quite so great, but it's still quite good. It's an important cultural property, that second level of designation. And this building is called the Nembutsu door, which means the hall for reciting the Nembutsu. And maybe if I just take off my mask and I can show you. So the Nembutsu is, car has just come. I hope you can still hear me okay. The Nembutsu is a practice related to this Buddha. He's called Amida Buddha, and he's believed to reside in a Western paradise. And this practice of what's called Pure Land Buddhism started in the 11th century. In the year 1052, people believed that it had been 1,500 years since the Buddha had died, and we'd therefore entered an age called Mappo, which means the degenerative age of the Dharma. Basically, it's been too long since the Buddha was alive. We've forgotten all of his teachings, and we've got very, very lazy. So there is no chance in our life now to get enlightened. But this Buddha, Amida Buddha, he lives in a Western paradise, and as long as we chant his name sincerely 10 times, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, then we can be reborn in his Western paradise and attain enlightenment there after our death. And so this hall, the Nembutsu door, is a hall for chanting the Nembutsu, for chanting Amida Buddha's name. And this Buddha that I showed you the picture of, this is the other very famous Daibutsu, big Buddha in Japan, located in Kamakura, a short journey from Tokyo, another easy day trip that you can do from Tokyo. A very famous and wonderful spot. And as we walk around, you'll see lots of these, maybe you've already seen some of these shops selling knickknacks and souvenirs. Perhaps it seems maybe a little bit tacky in this area that's not only got all these national treasures, but is also a designated UNESCO World Heritage Site to have these souvenir shops. But actually this is nothing new. Ever since the Edo period, going on a pilgrimage somewhere involved the 3 P's. You've got to pay, play, and pray. So pray is the ostensible reason for going on a pilgrimage, but you've also got to buy souvenirs. And maybe play is visiting a kabuki theatre. So nothing new. And then we just passed, perhaps we can just have a little look at it. This is a fire station. Unassuming building, but a very important one to have. You'll have noticed that the common theme is that these buildings sometimes burn down, and that's still a danger today. They're still made of wood, even though we have slightly better technology these days for protecting against fire. But that fire station will be the first line of protection should the worst happen and the fire alarm goes off. They also have automated fire systems dotted around, such as this one here. Actually, you can see just behind this cute little deer, this silver box actually contains firefighting equipment, and some of the boxes are even bigger and actually contain an automatic hose. So if the fire alarm goes off, the boxes automatically open, a hose pops out and starts spraying water onto the nearby buildings, making them damp and therefore protecting them somewhat against fire until the experts arrive. Fire was always a big problem in Japan. In the Edo period, so the kind of 17th through to the 19th centuries, Tokyo, which was known as Edo at the time, was nicknamed the City of Fires. Barely a week went by in Edo without a fire of smaller or greater scale. And they had whole troops of firefighters whose job was not to try and put out the fire with water. That was almost impossible. The firefighters would actually run to the district where the fire was and basically pull down any buildings close by in order to create a fire break to try and stop the fire from spreading. And as we've been walking up this lovely staircase here, you can see these stone lanterns and these slightly smaller stone pillars. And these have been offered over the years, centuries in some cases, by devotees. They pay a certain amount of money as a donation to the temple, and then either have a lantern or one of these stone markers installed with their name on for time evermore to record their donation. And I'll just take off my mask, and these are quite interesting to look at because you can see actually the amounts that people donated. So at the bottom it has the name of the person who made the donation and also where they came from. So actually all three of these donors came from nearby Osaka. And then this symbol here is N, which is yen, the Japanese currency. This is 100 for all of them. And then at the top this is kin, which means money. But you'll see that this second character on the three pillars is slightly different. And this is 1, 2, 3. So 100 yen, 200 yen, 300 yen, which is not a lot of money. At certain vending machines, 100 yen might get you a bottle of water if you find a cheap vending machine. 200 yen, you should be able to get a bottle of Coke. So it's not a lot of money. It doesn't even pay for the materials for the stone. And so what that shows us is that these were donated quite a long time ago when the value of the yen was much higher. But if you've been planning a trip to Japan, maybe you've even been doing a little bit of studying, and maybe you've even tried to memorize what the numbers in Japan look like. And I can show you here. So this is what the most common style of writing numbers looks like, this middle column. 1 is just a horizontal line, 2 is 2 horizontal lines, and then 3 horizontal lines. Things get a little bit more complicated after 3, but then 10 is also quite simple. It's 1 horizontal line with an intersecting vertical line. But you'll see that the numbers on these pillars are a little bit different. They're actually this number for 1, 2, and 3. And these were a separate system of writing numbers that was invented because the more standard numbers are so susceptible to fiddling. If you're an accountant and you want to fiddle the books, it's very easy to make a 1 into a 2 just by drawing another line. Or you can even make, if you're feeling really cheeky, you can make a 1 into a 10 just by drawing another line through the 1. And so these more complicated numbers were invented as a way to circumvent the possibility of fiddling the books. And that's what's used on these posts just here. You won't really find them on restaurant menus or anything like that. So for the most part, if you want to learn the number system in Japan, you can learn the more standard numbers, although actually most restaurant menus use our style of Western numbers. Makes things quite easy. And here we have this wonderful building perched on the hillside on stilts. And this building is called the Nigatsudo. And Nigatsudo means the second month hall, or I suppose you could call it the February hall. It was constructed at the same time as Tordaji, so in 752 it was first built. And it's a beautiful building, and it's very, very famous for an event that takes place here during the first 2 weeks of March every year, called Omizutori. And maybe you remember that just 10 seconds ago I said it's called the February Hall, but that event takes place in March. And the reason for that is because it's counted, the name of the building is counted using the old lunar calendar, which is slightly out of sync with our modern Gregorian calendar. And that event, Omizutori, the culmination of that 2-week event, is an event where the priests from the temple, they have these huge wooden torches which are lit at the end. I mean, they're the size of a person at least. And then they're paraded up into the hall itself, onto that veranda, that balcony that you can see. And then they're waved around in circles, making sparks fly all over the place, even down to here. And people gather below the temple here in this area, hoping to be caught in the rain of sparks. It's believed to be especially lucky if a spark lands on you, although given the distance, they're not actually hot when they touch you, so it's quite safe. Although I mentioned and I pointed out the fire station, and perhaps you wouldn't be surprised to hear that during one of these Omizutori events that's been taking place every year without fail since the 8th century, in 1667 the inevitable happened, and during Omizutori the Nigatsudo burnt down. So the current building dates from the 17th century, when they had to rebuild it, but even so it's still designated as a national treasure, which you'll remember is that highest designation that you can get. And inside the Nigatsudo is a deity called Kannon. The Bodhisattva of compassion and mercy is the central deity enshrined, but she's what's known as a Zettai Hibutsu. And a Hibutsu means a hidden Buddha or a hidden deity. So some temples have Hibutsu, and maybe once every year, or maybe once every 10 years, or 20 years, or 33 years, sometimes is a number, maybe for a day or a week, that statue is revealed and the public can see that hidden deity. But the Kannon enshrined at the Nigatsudo is a Zettai Hibutsu, which means that it is never, ever, ever shown. So sometimes that's believed that it preserves their power. If they're totally hidden and secret, they become more efficacious as a deity. And then this building here, this interesting building on stilts, with these kind of Toblerone shaped walls, is quite interesting. It's what's it's a treasure house, a treasure storehouse, and these were used in the past to keep temple and shrine treasures safe from fire, but also from moisture as well, from damp. Take a mental picture of that. I might try and talk about that a little bit more, because there's a very famous treasure storehouse in Nara. But just before going into a bit more detail with that, I want to point out this shrine on the left-hand side. We've been very Buddhism focused so far. My apologies, it's my favorite thing. Buddhism was the main reason why I always wanted to live in Japan. It's always been my passion. But Shinto, the indigenous religion, is of course equally important in Japan. And this is the first Shinto shrine that we've come across today. And this is a shrine dedicated to the kami, the Shinto deity Hachiman. And Hachiman is a god of war. And there are many, many Hachiman shrines in Japan. In fact, the number of Hachiman shrines in Japan, thousands, is second only to the number of Inari shrines in Japan. And Inari is the god of rice. And Hachiman, god of war, it sounds a little bit violent. But actually, warriors, they don't just fight, but they also protect. So Hachiman shrines are not just about preparing for war or praying for success in war. They're more about protection and protecting a place. And there's a reason why this deity, Hachiman, the god of war, is so intimately connected with Nara. So I mentioned earlier that the project of constructing Tordaiji and the great Buddha nearly bankrupted the country. And they basically ran out of metal. They ran out of bronze and they ran out of gold, and things were looking a little bit precarious, like can we finish this project? But a priest from the Hachiman Shrine in Usa, which is in Kyushu, the southernmost island of Japan, came all the way to Nara and said that he had received an oracle from Hachiman, and that was the main Hachiman Shrine in Japan, saying that that the project would be completed, no problem. And after they had received that message from Usa Hachiman, sure enough, in Tohoku, the northeast region of Japan, they found a huge area of gold that they could mine, and so the oracle came true. And so Hachiman has always been intimately connected with this project of constructing the great Buddha, and so Emperor Shomu ordered a branch shrine of the Hachiman Shrine in Usa to be created here, so that he could serve as a protector deity of this whole area. And I mentioned those storehouses and asked you to take a mental snapshot of that Toblerone shaped building. There's another much bigger storehouse on the other side of Nara Park. Unfortunately, it's a little bit far for us to walk from here, called the Shoso Inn, and it's the main treasure house of Tordaiji Temple, and dates all the way back to the 8th century. And these storehouses, they're built on stilts, which protects against damp and moisture. And then even inside those storehouses, items are stored inside cedar chests, and cedar is also very good at protecting against damp. And those chests themselves are then further elevated within the storehouse itself, off the floor. So they're kind of doubly elevated off the floor, which provides ultimate protection against moisture and damp. And then this massive storehouse, the Shoso Inn, contains 9,000 items, all dating from the 8th century. And these were all belonging to the imperial family at the time. And the collection, a little bit loud here. We'll just wait for these cars to go past. Oh, very nice sports car. This collection began after the death of Emperor Shomu. His widow, the Empress Komyo, she donated many items to the Shoso Inn to be preserved. And over the years, the collection grew to 9,000 items, and all of which date from the 8th century and include many, many national treasures. They're now kept in the collection of the Nara National Museum, which is also within this Nara Park area. And every year the Nara National Museum has this very, very big, very widely advertised special exhibition where a certain number of those items are put on show for the public, and it draws crowds of people from across Japan, history buffs, wanting to see these precious items. Interestingly, about 95% of them are items from Japan, but a significant portion, well, the remaining 5%, are actually items that arrived in Japan along the Silk Road. So the collection includes artifacts from Central Asia, India, things like beautiful glassware from Iran and things like that. So it's also a great way to see the connections that Japan had with the wider world all the way back in the 8th century. And then we've entered this area here. This area is called Wakaku-Sayama. Wakaku-Sayama means young grass mountain, which you can see here on the left hand side. In Japanese, yama is mountain, but I think this is more of a large hill. And this area is famous for an event that happens in the fourth Saturday in January every year, which is called Wakaku-Sayamayaki. Bit of a mouthful, but it means setting fire to Mount Wakaku-sa. And you can see that there are kind of two levels. You can see the grass at the bottom is quite short, and then there's a small fence, and then behind that the grass is left quite wild. And so during that event they set fire. Actually the Nara fire department does the opposite of their day job and sets fire to the mountain, and the whole mountain is engulfed in flames. If the grass is very dry, the whole thing is over in about 5 minutes, but if it's a bit damp, it takes a little longer. And it's a big event, and in the past this wasn't the case, but nowadays they also have a fireworks display to coincide with the event. And the interesting thing about the Wakaku-Sayamayaki is that no one really knows why it's done. So it's just a truck passing by. But the tradition is maintained and is still done. There are various theories about why this started. One is that the mountain was caught up in a dispute between Tordaiji Temple, where we started, and another temple within Nara Park called Kofukuji. And the two temples were fighting over land and where the boundaries were. And part of that, the mountain ended up getting caught ablaze in the fighting. Another potential theory is that it was a way in the past of controlling the local population of wild boar, and some people even say it's a way of scaring away ghosts. No one quite knows why this started, but the tradition is maintained. And then this shop here is quite interesting. It's called Kikuichi, which means the number one chrysanthemum. And it's a shop that sells very high quality Japanese handmade knives. But actually the history of the shop goes all the way back to the 12th century, when Kikuichi were officially sanctioned as the swordsmiths for the imperial family. So they were allowed to imprint the chrysanthemum seal on the swords. And so they've been making sharp things since then. Swords were outlawed in the 19th century, so that's when they switched to making very high quality kitchen knives, but they still use that chrysanthemum seal. And of course the knives, given their background and experience, are incredibly sharp, so a great place to buy a knife to take home. Make sure to put it in your hold luggage, not in your hand luggage, and when you get it home and use it, please be very careful. Very sharp, excellent quality knives in Japan. And we've been seeing, of course, a lot of deer on this walk, and I haven't really talked too much about them, but they are considered to be messengers of the gods, of the Shinto kami, who are enshrined in the Shinto shrines, and also messengers of the Buddhas as well. And the Buddhists were able to make a connection that the Buddha supposedly gave his first sermon in the deer park in Varanasi, so there's that connection. But also Kasuga Shrine, where we're heading now, the main kami, the main Shinto deity enshrined there, was believed to have arrived in Nara, actually on Mount Wakaku-sa, just to the side of us. He arrived on Mount Wakaku-sa riding a white deer. So there's this deep connection. Sometimes in very old paintings of Nara, you can see a picture of a white deer, and this is showing that legend. Lots of them here. As you can see in Nara, you need to watch your step a little bit. The inevitable outcome of grass eating. So we're now heading to a Shinto shrine, the most famous Shinto shrine in Nara, called Kasuga Taisha. And people visit Shinto shrines all through the year. You can visit shrines to pray for anything really. There are certain shrines that are famous for prayers for good luck in studying or academic pursuits. There are shrines that you can pray for healing from illness. There are even shrines you can pray for traffic safety. So you can go any time of year when there's a certain need that you have. But a particularly popular time to go to a Shinto shrine is on New Year's Eve or the first 3 days of the new year. So a lot of people visit a shrine at midnight on New Year's Eve to see in the new year. But the real boom period comes on January 1st, 2nd and 3rd, when people flock in their hundreds and thousands to go and pray. It's called Hatsumode, the first shrine visit of the new year, to pray for happiness, health, prosperity, success, safety in the year to come. But there are also some special times in one's life cycle that you can also visit a shrine. One, of course, is a wedding. Many people in Japan have a Shinto style wedding. Another one is called Shichi-go-san, which means 753, and it's traditional for children to come to a Shinto shrine when they reach 7, 5 and 3 years old, or I suppose backwards, 3, 5, 7 years old, and often they'll wear very cute little kimonos as they visit the shrine with their parents and family. And then another popular time to come to a shrine is for what's called Jusan Mairi. And Jusan Mairi means praying or visiting a shrine when you're 13 years old. But actually, I hope you can still hear me, there's a leaf blower just behind us. So Jusan Mairi, it means visiting when you're 13 years old. But actually people do it when they're 12 years old. And the reason for that is that it's counted using the old way of calculating ages in Japan. So in the past, everyone in Japan, when you were born, you're 1 year old already. And then everyone in Japan shared the same birthday. On New Year's Day, everyone in Japan becomes a year older. So actually in the past, if you were born on the very last day of the year, on the very last day of December, the very next day you would turn 2 years old. So nowadays, people in Japan have adopted the Western system of being 0 years old when you're born. But Jusan Mairi, they keep this tradition. So even though it's called visiting a shrine when you're 13, you actually do it when you're 12. And the reason for that number is because you have completed one full cycle of the Chinese zodiac. So the Chinese zodiac has an animal for each year, and there are 12 of them, and you've successfully completed one full cycle. So we've now entered the grounds of Kasuga Taisha, Kasuga Shrine, and there are a few different words for shrine. Oh, this is quite interesting. This is a warning sign telling you what to look out for when you're visiting Nara. The deer can bite, kick, headbutt you, or even knock you down. And actually in 2018, I believe there are 164 reported injuries in Nara resulting from deer. So you do have to be careful. They are wild animals, and especially if you buy a pack of the crackers, they will swarm you. So be prepared for that. And up until 1637, I believe, killing a deer in Nara was a capital offence, punishable by death. So they really are respected creatures. But we've now entered Kasuga Shrine and Taisha, Kasuga Taisha. There are different words for shrine, such as jinja or sometimes gu. But any time that you visit a shrine that's called something something Taisha, you know it's a big deal. It means a grand shrine, Kasuga Grand Shrine. And here you can see the water purification basin. And just above, we're actually standing underneath a wisteria tree. And there are actually around 200 of these wisteria trees in this area around the shrine. And there's a reason for that. There's always a reason for things in Japan. The reason for the wisteria trees is that this shrine was founded in the 8th century by the Fujiwara family. And you can't really talk about Japanese history without talking about the Fujiwara family. They were so influential for such a long period of Japanese history. Of course, in terms of the history of Japanese power, who had power, of course you've got to talk about the imperial family. And of course you've got to talk about then the shogunal military governments. But you'd also have to mention the Fujiwara family, who for long periods of Japanese history were pulling the strings behind the scenes. And they had this very clever technique of marrying their daughters into the imperial family, basically marrying their daughters to emperors. And that meant that they could then basically control the next generation, because the emperor would be raised in the household on their mother's side, which therefore means the Fujiwara family, and would owe their greatest loyalty to their grandfather, which would also be the Fujiwara family. So you had this very clever technique that they could kind of pull the strings from behind the scenes. And then the reason why they're so associated with wisteria is because their name, Fujiwara, the family name, means wisteria origin. So wisteria became their family crest, and that's why there's so much of it in this shrine. And then this banner, it's a little bit ugly. I think it would be better actually if they didn't have it, but it does handily show you what this shrine is famous for in terms of what type of prayers are most efficacious here. One of them is yaku-yoke, which means warding against evil. And then another one, which is one that you'll find at a lot of shrines and temples as well, is kanai anzen, which means within the household total safety. So safety and happiness, protection for you, your family, your house, a real cure-all. One other, we can't actually go inside the main shrine complex. Again, it's just not allowed to film inside, but it's very beautiful inside. I highly recommend going inside if you come to Nara. And one thing you'll often see, or one type of person I should say that you'll often see inside, is what are called miko. And miko is a shrine maiden, not to be confused with the similar sounding maiko, which is a trainee geisha. Miko, a shrine maiden, and these are young women employed by the shrine, and they perform ritual dances, and they're involved in the prayer services, and they're often also employed to sell the lucky charms, the amulets that worshippers buy. And because again, that association with Fuji, which means wisteria, of the Fujiwara family, they wear wisteria design hair ornaments. So plenty of wisteria action going on here. Unfortunately, we're a little bit late for wisteria. Wisteria in Japan usually blooms around the beginning of May, so it's already been and gone. But if you come here at the beginning of May, you can see wonderful purple paradise. Almost next door, there's also a botanical garden where you can see lots and lots of wisteria, and many other things as well, of course. Another feature, perhaps the most famous feature of this Kasuga Taisha shrine, are these stone lanterns. And I don't know if anyone has actually definitively counted all of them, but it's said that there's around 2,000 of these stone lanterns, many of which are very photogenically covered in moss, which have been donated over the centuries and have become a symbol of this shrine. This is about as close as we can get to the inner part of the shrine. Perhaps you can peek in here. Of course, you've got the obligatory Fuji wisteria tree. There are also metal bronze lanterns inside, many of them lined up. So people in Japan, they come to shrines and temples to pray for whatever they need. And there's a word in Japanese called genzei ryaku, which means worldly benefits. And so in Japan, it's not so common. I suppose in countries such as the UK, the US, Australia. In Christianity, you have this system where every Sunday you go to church, and that's what you're meant to do. So you have a set day that you go and visit a place of worship. But Japan's a little bit different. There's no real set routine for visiting a shrine or a temple. Of course, many people go for these set dates, for example, New Year, or in the middle of summer there's an event called Obon, the Festival of the Ancestors, when people visit their family graves at a Buddhist temple. It's when your ancestors' spirits are thought to return to this world for a short time. So there are certain yearly events where people visit a shrine or a temple, but there isn't really anything resembling a kind of weekly set observance at shrines and temples. People are more likely to come when there's something that they need. And so there are certain temples or shrines that are famous for a certain genzei ryaku, whether that's healing your eyes, protection from cancer, traffic safety, success in studying. And you can even buy handbooks, guidebooks from bookshops in Japan that list all of the temples and shrines in a certain area. But when you look at the index, when you look at the contents page, they're not ordered by geographical location, they're ordered by the genzei ryaku. So if you're having problems with your eyes, you can just skip to chapter 12, and that's where you can find all of the Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples in your local area where eye ailment healing is listed as a specific genzei ryaku, worldly benefit. It's a very practical way of being religious. I'm just going to take off my mask and hop back in front of the camera. Hello! And that basically concludes our tour of Nara Park today. It's been such a beautiful day. I really wish you could have been here live with us, and I hope that soon, once the current world situation has improved, that can be the case. We're waiting here for you and can't wait to show you around all of the areas that we didn't get to see today. There's even more to Nara Park than this short tour allowed us to show you. But thank you very much for joining us. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you soon.